Welcome to the CaptainSim 717 for MSFS. My expectations here are not super high because it's CaptainSim and it's $20. However, I'm going to do a full flight from a runway start, flying a route I've planned in my world map, so let's take a look and see how this classic airplane performs. So before we fly, we're going to take a quick look around the flight deck for virtual cockpit. First of all, if we head up to the Autopilot panel, see a fairly basic autopilot, which is correct for the period, but those flight instruments look suspiciously like an Airbus, as does the retrofitted FMC. We'll find out a little bit more about these later on in the flight. If we go to the overhead panel, it looks like it's going to support a cold and dark start, which I'll do at a later date. Looking at the virtual cockpit itself, it's reasonably detailed. So heading down to the Airbus-inspired FMC, head to the initialize page. You can see the route is already in there. I'm going to set my cruising altitude and go to the next page. The weights are already pre-populated. On the flight plan page, every waypoint in the route I plan on the world map is correctly represented in the airplane. So it's my usual test route, Stansted 04 to Glasgow 05 with a SID and a direct approach onto the ILS. The only addition I need to make to the perf page is to enter the flap setting, which is 1 from a runway start, and the V-speeds are all there for me. On the autopilot panel, we'll hit FMS speeds, nav mode, which should follow our plan. I'm going to dial in the cruising altitude we want of 26,000, and I'm going to hit vertical profile. For takeoff, I'm going to go parking brake off and full takeoff power. Start pulling back the rotate speed, and it's actually a really heavy airplane. It takes quite a while for us to get positive rate. But once we do, landing gear comes up. Initially, I'm just following the flight director manually, and I'm going to activate autopilot and auto throttle using hotkeys on my joystick. The airplane now settles comfortably into its automatic climb phase. And as we can see on VND, it's correctly following our planned route. For some reason the transponder isn't set correctly even from a runway start, so I'll just flick that over to TARE. So during the climb phase, the airplane doesn't obey any altitude constraints, it just goes into a sort of a dumb climb mode straight to your cruising altitude. But it does at least correctly hold 250 knots below 10,000 and then accelerate to cruise speed after that. One thing I did notice is that the airplane really struggles to climb the high you get even with a relatively light fuel load. As we reach top of climb, the airplane levels off and the climb annunciator is replaced by altitude and then altitude cruise. These very much appear to be default Airbus systems with a Boeing skin. So, as always, at cruise I'm going to grab my bottom of descent altitude, which at Glasgow is 2,400, and dial that into the autopilot panel, just ready for descent. With that done, the airplane does correctly continue to maintain its cruising altitude. Surprisingly enough, descent is actually quite authentic to Boeing, as we'll see in a minute, but first we're going to check out the cabin just behind us. The cabin of the CaptainSim 717 is not going to win any awards for visual fidelity, but it does at least allow us to set up some nice wing views. So even though this airplane appears to use default Airbus systems, it will actually descend automatically at its top of descent. This is quite a nice quality of life feature to have and is authentic to Boeing airplanes. Even more surprisingly, the airplane does actually level off during its descent to obey altitude constraints. As you can see here, we've got a constraint of about 7,000 at the Lauter waypoint. It then continues step descents in line with the altitudes listed in the FMC all the way to bottom of descent. The airplane also automatically enters deceleration phase at the appropriate point in the flight plan, and as you increment the flaps, the airplane slows down to the approach speed. Once I reach the approach speed, I'll drop the landing gear, ready for our approach. So if we zoom out the ND a little bit and take a look at our approach, our arrival and approach is correctly displayed on the ND and the airplane is following it as it should. What's curious is that this approach and arrival is actually bugged in the current version of the fly-by-wire A320. Sorry fly-by-wire fanboys, but the CaptainSim does this better at the moment. So once we're at bottom of descent, and we're about to turn on to final, I'm going to activate approach mode. If we take a look at the primary flight instruments, we can see that localizer and glide slope are armed, and the landing system diamonds are displayed on the PFD. As the airplane intercepts the localizer, see a localizer annunciator appear and the aircraft starts to follow it. As the airplane catches the glide slope and starts to descend on it, we see the glide slope annunciator displayed.
West of Glasgow. Contact Glasgow Tower on 118.8.
So at around 400 feet, we have a land annunciator. The airplane has 2 autopilots and the approach button says approach/land. So we can correctly assume that the airplane supports Autoland, right? Let's take a look at this landing.
60, 50, 40, 30, 20, retard.
So in my opinion, that land annunciator is slightly misleading. I didn't check the landing rate, but the fact we bounced halfway down the runway and I then had to flare it myself to get us to touchdown kind of speaks for itself. Anyway, that's the end of our review flight for the CaptainSim 717. I'm going to let you guys form your own conclusions here based on what you've seen, but thank you very much for watching. Please drop a like and feel free to subscribe for regular sim content. Take care and I'll see you next time.